My name is Dana White. Together with my good friend and colleague, Will Lynn, we formed the Myth Salon about 4 years ago. About 2 months ago, about a month ago, we began to experience the pandemic that is really defining our existence, that sent us all indoors. And we began to contrive a way that we could really run at pace with this pandemic and figure out what is happening. And so what we did was we created an online session that really included a group of us like you're seeing in front of you right now. That was a bunch of screens. That was an online web discussion. It got traction. People liked it. They thought it was a great idea, and we opened it up and changed our account to include audience participation. And Chris Vogler had generously committed or agreed to or showed excitement about coming to the Myth Salon tonight about a month ago, and the pandemic kind of threw a monkey into the mix. We couldn't have it where we can't get together. And this is what we're all dealing with, is this need to adjust our schedules, to step into a different world. And so we blended the two ideas together. There's Boris. Good morning. Good afternoon, Boris.
Afternoon.
We blended the two ideas together. And this is our first attempt at trying to do something on this scale. I will say the response to this has been overwhelming. I went back a moment when I was trying to give Selena her password to get in. There are 225 people who have decided that this is a good way for them to spend their day. We're all compelled to participate in this world in a very different sort of way, and to transform our consciousness as a result of the situations that we're dealing with. And with that said, what I want to do is, I don't want to lose the rituals that have become important to the Myth Salon. And so I'm going to do the little rituals that I do to open it, and then I'll turn it over to Will, and Will will introduce Chris Vogler. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to make my bowl scene. A wonderful moment of silence to begin. And then I would like to light our candle. All right. I would just like to do a couple words. First, seems bizarrely appropriate, from Albert Camus in a book he wrote called The Plague. The one way of making people hang together is to give them a spell of the plague. No question of heroism in all this. It's a matter of common decency. The only means of fighting a plague is common decency. And from Rumi, goodbyes are only for those who love with their eyes. Because for those who love with the heart and the soul, there is no such thing as separation. So with that, I would like to turn this over to my very good friend and colleague, Will Lin. And Will, if you would say a few words and tell us who we have with us today and what this whole thing is about. As the attendees are still flocking in, I'm just deeply touched by everything that this whole community has become. So, Will?
Thank you, Dana. Before we get started and all that stuff, I think that just want to continue setting the space. And I thought it might be nice if we just took maybe 10 or 15 seconds, maybe just a few breaths, for all of us to send our hearts to all the places we know they need to be right now, to our loved ones, to each other, to the loved ones of everybody that's here. Maybe be a special little thing. So just a second. So the other thing to do before we get started is to give gratitude to Pacifica Graduate Institute and Michael Weesey Productions for sharing this event with their audiences. Pacifica Graduate Institute offers degrees in mythology and depth psychology, and Michael Weesey is the leading publisher of books on filmmaking and storytelling, which means that there are a lot of people in the audience that are from both the mythology and the storytelling crowd, which I think is a very profound and amazing moment that so many mythologists and storytellers and story students are together right now, which I want to come back to. It's one of the most important things to me in general, and it's a really special opportunity right now. But let me introduce first Dana White, who you just met. Many of you know is contributing faculty at Pacifica Graduate Institute, a scholar, an author, and editor, and he is the host. Typically, these events take place in his house. I'm the moderator. My name's Will Lin, PhD in mythology, founding chair of general education at Studio School, and an editor for the Joseph Campbell Foundation. And relevantly to this particular event, I'm currently working on the study materials for Hero with 1,000 Faces. And we'll come back to Christopher Vogler, but first let me introduce the panelists. We have Dr. Patrick Mahaffey, who's the founding chair of mythological studies at Pacific, PhD in mythological studies at Graduate. Selena Matthews is an author, clinical depth psychologist. Tara Gilmar is a trauma and integrative depth psychotherapist. Voris is a scholar, professor at the University of California, Riverside. Elizabeth Nelson is an author and faculty at Pacific Graduate Institute. David Huff is a filmmaker and photographer. Oh, and I do see Evans Lansing Smith. Dr. Smith has joined us as the chair of the Pacifica's Mythological Studies PhD. And that brings us to our special guest, Christopher Vogler, who's the author of Writer's Journey, Mythic Structure for Writers, and who has had a long and storied career in Hollywood. I think it's fair to say he's the most read living mythologist in Hollywood and across the media landscape, so why continue the bio after that? And the first responder, the honored responder tonight will be Dara Marks, an esteemed mythologist and an author on storytelling, who will provide the first response to what Chris comes to share. While I'm introducing everybody, I'll just make one comment on the format so everybody's on board. Dana has created the space for us. I'll introduce a little bit more. Chris will give a presentation for around 20 minutes of his thoughts. Dara will respond. I will then ask a question just as a way, as the first panelist, to bring it into the panel. The panel will begin by responding especially to Chris's thoughts, but there are a lot of very smart, brilliant people here, and I expect as we drift into the hour that many who knows where we'll go. And then we'll bring it back together, and Dana will anchor us in a close, and Chris will give any final thoughts that he has. Oh, and very much, of course, and we will come to you from the panel section and ask the audience if they have any questions that they'd like to ask. Then Dana will wrap it up. So with the basic rules of engagement, I'd like to shift to setting the context a little bit more, what we're here for and what we want to talk about. And the first thing to say there is just it's very humbling to see. We put out this invitation, I think less than 48 hours ago, and 225 people signed up. There are already over 150 of us here. I'm moved and inspired, and really looking forward to tonight, and hope you guys get what you came for. I think that you will. This opportunity to build community is very important to me. Mythology is an incredibly expansive field. Mythology expands not just around the world and across time, from the most ancient religious narratives to the most contemporary stories and political narratives and personal experiences, but there are also a set of communities. There are storytellers. There are mythologists with a real sensibility that appreciates depth psychology, where myth is seen as psyche or as a dream in a certain way. There are communities out there that are focused on linguistics, that are very much a very strong and significant population of mythologists. And I could go on, and I will go on in future events. And what I'm trying to say is mythology is a large community, but that community isn't always connected. And in this time when we're making it a point to reach out to the people we know we should have reached out to long ago, and that extension, those extended areas of our connections and network, I feel like it's a really good time for us to be expanding that network of mythologists and people that are in this sphere. So that means, on one hand, bringing communities together, which is where I started by saying it's just so beautiful to know that there are storytellers in this audience, there are academic mythologists in this audience, there are linguists in this audience, there's a huge range of philosophers, there's a huge range of people that come to myth in different ways. And so there's the community, and then there are the different approaches. So hopefully we're bringing together the community, we're bringing together the approaches, and it's a real honor to have Chris Vogler here, practically personifying a bridge between mythology and Hollywood. And next week, which feels like next month, because I know a second feels like an hour, feels like a week, feels like a day, feels like right now, it's incredible. But next week we'll be with John Colarusso, who's one of the world's leading Indo-European scholars. He built the world's largest linguistics department. And he'll be here with a totally different point of view. He spent decades also in the NSA and CIA as a mythologist. And so we'll just continue to bring in an eclectic group of voices to meet with this core panel that we have here, many of which are from this Pacifica crowd. And, there's nothing more important to me than that. That's been a mission of mine for so long, and it feels like a very ripe moment to build community. So to transition to Chris, there's just one thing conceptually, intellectually, that I'd like to say about the hero's journey as we get started in the context of this. And that is that I think that many people confuse the hero complex for the hero's journey. And the people that are mad at the hero complex, that, stuffy hero who's always ready to save the day, but it's actually kind of, egoic or narcissistic or something like that, right? Anybody who's angry or frustrated at that hero complex, not only do they have a right to be, but now is really a time that we're seeing that happen. We've seen real deconstruction of that hero complex for the last several decades, and it's only accelerated in the most recent years. However, those who have pointed their frustration and anger at the hero complex, at the hero's journey, I want to say to them that they haven't just thrown out the baby with the bathwater, they've thrown out the cure, because you can't get through the hero's journey with a hero complex intact. In fact, it's absolutely essential to deconstruct the hero complex to complete the hero's journey. And insofar as I think that's one of the things that we're going through right now, that's one of our cultural moments, is where we go inside and we are in our inner world and we're looking at ourselves and we're questioning who we are. I hope that we'll continue deconstructing the hero complex and maybe return from that journey in a new way. And with that, it's my honor, pleasure, delight to welcome Chris Vogler. Thank you, Chris, for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Will, and thank you, Dana, for setting me up so well. There were so many wonderful things with your quotes, Dana, and your good words, and Will, with your philosophies and perspectives you brought to this. It just resonates very well with what I've been thinking. And I want to share with you today some of the thoughts that have comforted me as I've gone about my changed life. I haven't had many times because we're so amazingly busy. I don't know who these people are who are bored with this time, because it seems to me that time is speeding up and we have plenty of work to do. And the world needs the kind of specialized knowledge that all of us gathered here have. But I have had a few chances to go by myself and go inward, walking, and some things came through. And I want to share some of that with you. But I want to chime in with something that Will was saying about just feeling some compassion for all the suffering beings around us, all the people, of course, who are completely terrified and don't know, they're confused. They don't know how terrified they should be and how long this is going to go on. And they're worried about their economic situation, of course. And then all the people who actually have the virus and maybe even are dying alone, which is one of the terrible sides of this, of course. And they're the people who are losing their loved ones that way. And I've been concerned and worried for friends of mine who seem to be turning to some pretty screwy conspiracy theories to try and comfort themselves or keep their minds busy, I guess. But I don't see how those things help very much. So I'm interested in going back and taking another look at the hero's journey set of ideas.
1 second, Chris. I want to fix that so we don't keep making that noise. Dana, can you please mute? And Voris, can you guys please mute while Chris continues right now? Sorry about that. I know that would be distracting. Thanks.
All set. Okay. So, I just want to sort of remind you, I think everybody listening probably has an idea of what the hero's journey is, although there are different versions. But it's time to take a look at it again through this particular lens. So I'm going to remind you of things that you already know, but take a look at the new applications. I've spent my adult life interested in these things and studying them, and it's always been a wonderful tool for applying to screenwriting. That was my basic operation with this material. When I found Campbell's ideas, the ideas of Joseph Campbell in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, I was in film school, and it set me up very well to have a nice career in the film business, advising studios and kind of secretly slipping in this specialized knowledge, which I think is helpful, of course, for making more entertaining stories, more psychologically realistic stories. And it's always been a lovely thing to give you little metaphors in the small problems you have in your everyday life. But in this kind of an event, I realized this is what the hero's journey was really made for big, shattering events like this that affect a lot of people. So this is a good time to take a step back and review all of this with this light. So I'm just going to charge in and review my version of the journey, which is a little different from Joseph Campbell's. If you know it's very comprehensive, as he gives diagrams and charts in his books. It will often have, up to 33 or 36 different possibilities because he's trying to cover everything. And I more or less cooked it down to what we would today call an algorithm that described as generally as I could the sort of things that are going to come up anytime you tell a story or anytime human beings try to do something difficult. They are almost inevitably going to meet with these stages. And I reduced it to 12 operations that I thought were fundamental. And the first of these is the ordinary world. And this corresponds well with how Campbell described it. There's some world which we're introduced to at the beginning of an event or a story. And there, everybody sort of knows what the deal is. Life has gone on for a while. Maybe there are polarities and frictions within a person or a society that are troubling, but everybody's coping somehow. And I think for us in this current situation, that's the rapidly disappearing past, the old way. You know, I haven't found quite the way to describe the before and the after, but we're definitely in some new universe. And the old normal is rapidly disappearing in the rearview mirror. So we have passed that stage. And we now are on to the next thing, which is the call to adventure. Most stories, most myths really get rolling when some big event happens or it's about to happen and a call to adventure is issued. And obviously, we've all had an enormous global call to adventure. I feel sometimes that the orbit of the Earth is passing through a cloud, and it's a cloud of question marks. How long, how deep, will life ever return to that normal? Is it going to get me? Is it going to change my life or the way we conduct our civilization? So the call has come very loud and shatteringly. And I think many people are stuck here, not quite knowing how to jump, or they maybe have gotten to the next stage, which is typically refusal of the call, where you say, nothing doing, I resist that, I don't want anything to do with it. So most of us are hovering around these two stages. It's an odd artifact of what we're going through that, and many people have noticed this, that time is moving faster somehow. It seems that way to me. And it's moving at different speeds for different people, because some people are already at the end of this entire 12-stage journey because they've either contracted the disease and recovered, or they've got it and they've died. And for other people, it's a distant thing. In some countries, they're deep into it. Other countries, it's beginning to decline. Some countries hasn't really hit them hard yet. So a thing that strikes me about the call to adventure is that it's like a big noise on the soundtrack, a big discordant crash on the soundtrack, and it made everybody flinch and crouch down, go into a defensive crouch. And this is something that is known in police circles, that if a gunshot goes off, or if someone slams a door, it sounds like a gunshot, and a typical human being, policeman or not, will drop into this defensive crouch and will reflexively make a fist. You can't help it. It's instinctive. You just do that. And unfortunately, if the policeman is holding a pistol, he'll fire and not even realize he's fired. So this is why so many things, I think it accounts for some of the things that accidental, unfortunate things that happen when the police are under a lot of stress. So everybody is crouching down in this position. And if we think about the chakras, these imaginary centers that sort of regulate things up and down the body, and which are part of a spiritual tradition of ascending to higher consciousness, everybody dropped down into the lower chakras, especially the lowest, that has to deal with your roots, your survival, your contact with the earth. You can't trust the earth or the air anymore. So it's understandable, and I have a lot of compassion for that, that everybody dropped down into these lower chakras. And so our job as people who have some little bit higher view or more comprehensive view, it's our job to help lift ourselves up and lift everybody else up out of those lower chakras. So that's why I've been sort of reviving meditation, bringing that more strongly back into my life, paying a lot of attention to that, to just try and change the vibrational rate right in front of me. What can I influence? Not much, but I can influence my desktop. I can influence my kitchen. I can influence the story I'm working on, the song I'm writing, and then intend for the good vibrations and the good work of that to go out and affect everybody else. So I think that's my orientation at this stage of call to adventure and refusal of the call. And the next stage, so there's three: ordinary world, call to adventure, refusal of the call. And part of that refusal, by the way, is people denying it, dragging their feet about doing something, failures of leadership. All that comes under the category of refusal of the call. And also these conspiracy things I've mentioned are part of people, just going, I can't handle that, so I've got to go someplace else. I've got to make some other story about this. But the next stage, number 4 in my list, is meeting with the mentor or mentors. And in Campbell's language, he says the wise old man or the wise old woman. And I felt I needed to expand that a little bit and found a more general word, mentor. But the idea here is that it's natural and healthy when there's some big crash on the soundtrack of your life to seek out wisdom. And that can go in 2 directions: going out to seek out mentors, teachers, experts, medical experts in this case, psychological experts who can help counsel us through this, but also going inward and accessing our own sources of inspiration, our own instincts, our experiences, our own intuitions, and our own, the guidance of the inner self. It's what Will was talking about, with the idea that there's a difference between the hero's journey and this hero complex. I totally understand that. And it has to do with moving from the attachment to the ego to a better relationship with the self, and moving again up in within the chakra system to the higher levels where you are more in contact with the higher self. So it's natural to do that, and we're all searching and scratching around for the best mentors. And there was quite a flurry I observed in the early days of this pandemic of getting information that sounded good about how you should do masks, or how you should, what your diet should be, or how you should clean the groceries or whatever. And it all sounded good. And then you find out 2 days later, that's dead wrong. Big arguments about ibuprofen and other medicines. So that's a hard thing for people, is to sort through who's a real mentor, who's a trustworthy mentor. And I think we're all going through that process. And I've been reading about Dr. Fauci and other experts like him around the world, and they seem, the good ones seem to have a real simple, clear message that's consistent as it can be under the changing circumstances. And it's transparent. They just tell the flat truth with no spin or trying to make it seem more hopeful or any of that. And those are the ones I think that we can put more trust in. So once having consulted with the mentors and your own internal sense of what's right, the next stage is to cross the great threshold between the general zone of the ordinary world. Like we're, not so far from our normal world, but we have a long way to go. And it's a new world. So at some point, I think all of us accepted it and said, this is going to be a big change in a long run. And some are still resisting, but most of us, amazingly, have gone along with the social changes and restrictions and loss of freedom. It's very inspiring and hopeful to me that so many people are complying out of goodwill and out of, as Dana's quote from Camus refers to, just a social good of going along with these sensible precautions. So it's quite a leap to cross the threshold. It's a big chasm, and in movies it's often represented by literally crossing a river or swinging across some canyon or climbing stairs or racing from one world to the other. Some big indication that you've left an ordinary world, as Campbell says, and gone to a very different special world. And that's a significant moment. And I don't think most of us quite there yet. We are just feeling our way. So next stage is now you're in this new world, and there's a stage that I sort of group some operations together called, in my language, tests, allies, and enemies. And this is the beginning of what Campbell calls the road of trials. But the early stages of that are making allies, making friends, connecting with people, which we're all doing, which is fantastic. Isn't it amazing and wonderful that we evolved the ability to do this tele-socializing before we really needed it? It's interesting. That's the least I can say. It's kind of miraculous. So you find out who your allies are, and you find out who your enemies are. And many people have noted these events are splitting us, or it's making clear. It's shining light on the good guys and the bad guys, and the distinctions between us in how people are reacting to it. And also lots of tests. And at this stage, stage 6 in my scheme, they're small tests. This is like pop quizzes. So you're tested every day. Did I sanitize everything well? Did I remember not to touch the buttons at the crosswalk? Did I, do all these rituals and routines? And did I observe the taboos? So you're tested in these small ways, but they could kill you. Who knew that this hero's journey theory that I had played around with all my life would suddenly not be a metaphor anymore? It's not a metaphor. It's literal life and death. To go to the grocery store, touching a vegetable can kill you. So all of a sudden, these tests are not so small, and but there are bigger ones yet to come. So next stage, number 7, is a phase where we are marching along towards this thing that's on the charts Dr. Fauci keeps showing, which is that big peak in the bell curve. The middle of a story is how I would graph it. If you graph the hero's journey in a linear fashion, you find that in the middle, usually there's some big peak, and then it drops off in tension and you relax a little bit, but then it hits another point just before the end, and it may be, and it should be dramatically, even higher, even more dramatic. So the curve of the hero's journey describes two big phases and maybe more. And I think we're going to see that with the virus, that it will, in different places at different times, it will reach that peak and then drop off. And if we're not careful, it may come back and bite us even worse. And the difference is that between the theoretical and dramatic form and what's happening to us is that in the screenplay world, you want those peaks to be as high and sharp as they possibly can be. You want it to be super dramatic with thousands of deaths and all kinds of dangers. And we're trying in reality to flatten it out and make it not dramatic. We want this to be as boring a story as we can make it. As dramatic as it is, really that's what we'd like, is for it to be no big deal. So this seventh stage is about approaching that big peak, and it's all the things you do to prepare for that. And one most important thing I think for us is that it's a time when the scales fall from your eyes and you see yourself differently. You see past your impressions of yourself, the ideas you carried around with you about yourself, maybe imposed by other people, maybe by you, and you see other people anew. You see them freshly. And that's borne out in hundreds and hundreds of stories where people make first impressions in the first act, in those first 5 or 6 steps. And then they get to this stage and all of a sudden, you're not what I thought you were, and I'm not what I thought I was. And different qualities start to emerge. And that's one of the silver linings, can be, in all of this, is finding out stuff you didn't know about yourself and realizing you are stronger or more adaptable than you thought, and maybe disappointed in other people or amazed by the potential in other people. So the next stage, 8, is the ordeal. Campbell calls the stage the supreme ordeal, because it's where you have, in a movie, you stage the ancient tableau of death and rebirth. And every decent story has got an acting out of that ancient scene of the dying and rising god, or the hero who must, to the audience, appear to die and then be reborn. And it's in every good story, there's at least 1 or 2 good tests of that type. So what you got there, Will? What is that? What are you showing?
That's just a scarab, which symbolizes that moment of changing direction from down to up.
Oh yes, yeah. Oh yeah, that's a rich one. Those dung-eating beetles have a lot to tell us. But it's the moment when the hero is transformed, you know, and you, because you were willing to face your greatest fears, willing to face the possibility of death, and maybe even experience death around you, or spiritually, or lots of death in the world in many different dimensions. If you can face that and survive, it will transform you. That's sort of the promise of the hero's journey. So the next stage is, okay, after that, you survive, so what? You are transformed and you celebrate that. And this is a phase called the reward in my language. And this is stage 9. And here you kick back, you celebrate, you maybe feast on the dragon that you killed. And it can be a time of self-evaluation where you have deep realizations. It can be a time of community coming together. It can be insight. A lot of movies will use the imagery of light. They'll light candles, they'll light cigarettes, there'll be a fire scene, or the cowboys will stand around a campfire and talk about the big stampede that just happened. But it's a time for reflection. But it's dangerous because you can get a big head. Maybe you get some psychic powers from having faced death or gone to the world of the gods, or to the underworld. But you might also get an inflated ego at this point and have to be taken down a peg or two. Love scenes often happen here because it's natural to come together and celebrate because we survived death. And I think that's a little warning here. Don't get too happy if the numbers fall off and everybody says, well, we don't have to socially isolate or do any of this stuff anymore and go right back to work. Not a good idea because there's more story yet to come. So the next stage is, I call the road back, 10. And here we are finishing the work of this central part in the special world and getting ready to return to normal life. And there is a particular quality that emerges in stories at this point. Everything picks up speed. It accelerates. You have chase scenes. There's a tremendous concentration of chase scenes in movies at this point. If you looked at 100 Hollywood movies, 75 of them have got a chase at this stage. And I think it signifies that, for one thing, the audience is tired. They're exhausted. And so they need something alarming or something that picks up the pace to sort of wake them up again. And so it might be a recurrence of the virus. That's one possible scenario here. And that we have to hurry to avoid a disaster. The 11th stage, next to last, which is the best spot dramatically in any kind of composition just before the end, is called the resurrection. And it's virtually a repetition of stage 8, the ordeal, because you go through a death and rebirth experience again, but magnified. And on all the levels, every chakra is involved in a good story, in a well-told tale. You will find every experience the hero has had on the journey comes into play. Every person the hero has met is incorporated, and you've taken the best of all of them, and it comes into play in a final showdown that has all these characteristics at the same time. It's purifying, it's a catharsis, it's a sacrifice, it's a showdown, and it's the climax of the whole tale, the highest point of tension. And it mirrors stage 8, but again, on every level. Stage 8 in many stories is only on one level, maybe physical, maybe emotional, maybe spiritual, but in this stage just before the end, everything comes into play. And then the final stage, and this is where Campbell rings the bell for me very well, is return with the elixir. And elixir is a word from Arabic that means some kind of magic potion or powder that has the panacea quality. It can heal all wounds and cure all diseases. And Campbell's statement about this is, to be a true hero and to complete the journey, you have to bring something back to share with everybody else. And you have to sacrifice a little of the treasure you gained to share with everybody else. So maybe you had a nice dragon barbecue back there at stage 8 and 9, and you fortified yourself, but don't forget to bring back a nice haunch of dragon bacon to share with everybody else. And I think about the COVID virus as a kind of weird dragon, and dragons are hard to kill. And typically, either you think you killed them and they come back to life, or maybe you kill one and then you find out the dragon actually had a mate or a mother, like Grendel. Grendel is killed, but then Grendel's mother turns out to be yet a worse monster. So there's a warning in stage 11, but in stage 8, you've overcome all, in stage 11, rather, 12, finally the return with the elixir, you've overcome all that, you've faced death twice, and you came through transformed, completely transformed now, and able to be what Campbell calls master of the two worlds. So you can operate in the unconscious world, which is what the special world represents, and in the real world, the ordinary world. And you come back with this elixir, which is maybe just having a good story to tell. That's enough. Or having a survival technique that you can share with everybody else. So this is my revisiting of the hero's journey. And I just want to add one little thing as a kind of call to adventure to my fellow creative artists and to people in the healing professions, that you are walking in a path that many have walked before. You're part of the shamanic tradition, I think. And what that means is that you have special powers, special skills. You've trained for it, you've studied for it, you have it in you to begin with. And you are obliged in these times to do what shamans did in difficult times. They went inside, they consulted with the gods humbly. They said, we have a human problem here, so what have you got? And the gods, if they're in a good mood, would give a gift in the form of a vision. And the vision quest is how the shamans went to get this message. And then they would do something with it. They would take it and turn it into a work, usually some kind of communal ceremony, ritual, song, dance, story, parade, something that everybody could do, and that would bring the whole community together and would have in it the seeds of how do we get out of this and what did we do wrong and how can we make it better in the future. I think all of us who have a healthy attitude about this are thinking ahead to what can we take out of this and use it going forward to make the world better. And I'm just thinking here about a song that was very popular in Britain in World War II called We'll Meet Again. And it's a very simple little song sung by a woman named Vera Lynn, who's still alive, 103 years old, and still singing the song. But it united Britain because the message was so easy to understand. It was simply, we'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. And it had two levels of meaning. One was society is completely disrupted. In World War II, we had to hide underground because the Germans were bombing us, and the kids had to be sent away for safety, and all your pubs had to close, and all your social life was suspended. But we're going to get back to it someday. We don't know where, we don't know when, but I'm sure we're going to get back. And the other side, little heavier side to it, is a lot of people aren't going to make it. And we know that. We know many will be killed in the war. There'll be a lot of disruption and diseases that will kill more people. And so we're sad about that, but we know that someday we will be together again with them. So that's something that has given me some hope, and I'm looking for expressions like that from the creative community, and I'm seeing it, you know, the spontaneous creation of songs that are trying to heal people, the entertainment community even giving away some of their entertainment, streaming some things for free because they know people need it and it's doing its job. So there is my quick spin around the hero's journey wheel, and I'm ready to open it up. So what have you got, guys? And Dara, maybe you can.
Thank you, Chris, and we'll turn right over to Dara. Thank you.
Chris, that was really terrific. Thank you so much. And I also just have to throw a thank you out to Dana and Will for bringing this together. You know, Chris, the comments, so many things, just so rich, everything you were talking about. But sort of where you ended, have had a lot of thoughts about that because I was thinking about how in terms of what is going on in the world today, how scientists worldwide are being called to try and heal this virus. And I think that ultimately we are going to see an explosion of healing, things that could have taken another decade, but all these great minds have come together and are sharing and are just deep into something that, and something very powerful is coming out of it. And in that same regard, if you mentioned about our creative community, and I think our call to adventure right now is the call to create. And it is the, if you kind of deconstruct the word create, it's to make new life. And we are in a cycle right now of life, death, life. Something, you know, there's just the common feeling that life will never be the same again. Which means that it is a death cycle into at the portal of new life. And so it is a form of initiation of where we are in the world right now, and where scientists are healing our physical bodies and are active in the outer world. Artists are guides to the inner world. That the source of all creativity is our inner world, is our inner life. And, you know, right now, I think is a time for artists to unite, for, I conduct a lot of writers groups, for example, small groups where people share their stories and share their progress, share whatever they're making. And I think we really need a collaborative spirit creatively right now to try and understand the world that is emerging, that in addition to the call to create, in the position as writers, in many ways, you are the midwives, you are birthing this new world, you have a vision of it as it comes into the world. And if we don't hold that vision and try and see it for what it is and respect it and nurture it, it can do all kinds of things. So the more allied artists become and the more expressive artists become in this new world that's emerging, this new something, whatever it is, the more we can unify, I think the more we can take this emerging new life to the higher consciousness that it's trying to seek. And so I'm really kind of spinning this towards that this is something very noble, that it's very, very hard right now for so many of us to sit so quietly. You know, we are being told literally to go inside. And what I really want to say here is, and that's our territory. If we are called to go inside, it's the inside, you know, where depth psychology and the arts and all, you know, the inner understanding of the world and suffering and there you have it. Thank you.
Just giving
we have
you
a visual. Thank you. But anyway, so I just would like to sort of amplify what you were talking about, because I think it's really right on point that this is something so powerful, so serious, and you know, this is the time, this is now. And I would just also say, as we create, I think because we are dealing with new life, treat it as newborn. Treat it tenderly. Your job isn't to direct it, it's to receive it. And I think if we can be receivers right now and hold this new emerging world, we will be doing a lot, and it gives really affirm a sense of purpose and direction right now. So thank you, Chris, for that. I would just want to add one storytelling note to what you were saying, which is so wonderful and also so healing, that just in the expression of the hero's journey or any archetypal pattern that we see, what you've done for us is create a landscape. You create something that removes us from the notion of just pure chaos into something that has motion, that has beginning, middle, and end, has destination, has hope all through it. And this is the power of what we are doing. The vision is something that can really, really direct the world out of this birth canal of darkness back into the light.
Well, yes, that's beautifully said. And I relate a lot to everything you've said, but the idea of holding and sort of mentally, spiritually, holding the space. My publisher, Michael Weezy, uses that language, that this is our job as shamanic creators and healers to hold this space for the world with a positive intention, because there's so much confusion and a lot of negativity going on that needs to be counteracted by a very strong, solid, consistent message of positivity and hope. So I'm totally in agreement with that. Yeah. So
the one thing I'll say to there's something that you guys are saying that I just want to synthesize a little bit. Dara, you're talking about going in and putting an emphasis on that, and the journey that you're describing, Chris, being more than a metaphor, being literal. To me, one of the things that really stands out about the literalness of the hero's journey right now is that the threshold that I know I crossed is one of those people whose home, just with my dog, is literally my door. I went inside when they said, we've decided it's real, everybody go inside and we'll all come out. And so it's just literally, like, to me, the hero's journey is very much an inner journey, as both of you have said in various ways. And that's really literal right now. We've literally gone in, and our underworld, our other world is in ourselves, in our places. And hopefully we're incubating. Hopefully these are cocoons, and hopefully we come out new.
Well, I'll be honest with you. When all this came up, on a certain level, I was delighted, because I thought, well, now everybody will leave me alone for a while, and I can go inward and I can do my internal work. But it hit me very soon that we all needed to get into virtual ambulances and go around and help people, because they would be so disturbed and desperate. And so we are being called out of our shells. And so it's a duality, that it's this two-part pulse of going inward, as the old shamans did, and then going out with what we found. And I love what you said there about doing it collaboratively. That doesn't come naturally to me, but every time I've done it, it's turned out better than if I'd done it alone. So I've learned to respect that. I just want to toss you a little story that shows this shamanic business of going in. This is from the time in Iceland about 1,000 years ago, when Christianity was starting to come in. They sent missionaries over from Norway, because the king of Norway had converted. And the missionaries were rough, tough Vikings with swords. And they started killing people if they didn't agree with the Christian conversion. And the pagans, fought back. And so there was a lot of bloodshed, and the society was being ripped apart. And so they tried to work it out at a big conference, a big meeting, and they couldn't do it, because they were 50-50 polarized between pagan holdouts and Christian converts. So they wisely turned to the shaman, the wisest of the pagan priests, who was a guy named Torgir Torkelson. And Torgir heard them, and they said, look, Torgir, you have the connection with the gods. So go and ask, what are we supposed to do and we'll accept whatever you say. Both sides agreed, we'll accept your judgment. So all he did was he pulled a fur rug over his head and sat quietly on a rock for a day and a night, consulting with his gods and spirits and inner guides. And he came out, threw the robe off, and he said, folks, we're going to go Christian. The gods have discussed it with me, and they have said, our time is up. We realize that. We're stepping off the stage. You're not going to be able to survive without contact with Europe, and we depend on Norway for trade, so we're going to go Christian. And he could have gone home and continued to worship his gods, but he didn't. He went home and he gathered up all of his magical equipment and his wooden idols, which he had carved himself and had worshipped for years, and he threw them all into a waterfall in an act of sacrifice. And that's an element that I mentioned a couple of times in the Hero's Journey recap, but it's very, very important that we all are sacrificing, some people sacrificing their lives. Many heroic people, by the true definition of heroism, are sacrificing their safety to keep us going, like at least the grocery store workers and many other, obviously hospital people and so forth, who are taking big risks to keep society turning. So that's just my little story about this business of going in and consulting the gods and then coming back and possibly yourself having to sacrifice in order to deliver this necessary healing message to people.
Well, speaking of consulting the choir, a perfect time to turn it over to the panel. Anybody who's has a thought or question is ready to jump in. What patient people. I know you all do. Please jump in.
Well, I'd like to say something about the difference between story and narrative. And I did a little reflection writing before our last session. And it seems to me that there are a lot of stories that we can fall into and find ourselves living out. But unless we embrace them with passion and authenticity, it seems to me that we're walking by somebody else's drum. And we're not listening to the character of our own heart rhythm and our own relationship to one another. So this is, to me, an opportunity that is calling us back into that deep sense of a self that ultimately connects to everybody else. And it's the self that started before we became a separate self, before we started forming ourselves into these individualized patterns. It's that narrative, the narrative of the anima mundi, that we can learn how to respond to and listen to, that has fallen away from our sense of hearing. And that whole sense of living out and touching the heartbeat of the cosmos is what is out there as an opportunity now. And if we go forward 3 or 4 months and don't pick up that during this strain, we will have lost a very valuable opportunity.
I think one of the things that I've heard internal wrestling with is people in this time are being told to do self-care and self-compassion and compassion for others. And I've had questions come up of a misunderstanding of what compassion is and understanding it as permissiveness or a lack of structure. And the piece that I've heard here today that's been really wonderful is that it's still holding on to the pieces that we need to cooperate together to make this work. We need to protect ourselves, we need to protect each other, but also then feeling the sadness of the separation and the grief of the loss of being able to touch, while still maintaining those rules that we need to keep ourselves safe and take care of each other. And I think that a question went by about sacredness and sacrifice, and about it being not about just giving up as a pure loss, but being mindful and conscious of it, to allow it to be something that is a sacred offering that we're sharing with each other.
I really like the collaborative part of the conversation, Chris. And I was wondering, you know, when I hear the hero's journey put out, and you did it so well in your own take on this, and as I read Campbell and understand, we often interpret it, I think, particularly as Westerners, as this solo journey of the strong person who's going to go out there and become self-actualized, and it all comes together, and we arrive at something. And my own personal experience is that my life is anything but linear. There's a lot of left turns and right turns and stumbles along the way. And I have not done any of it by myself. And I'm thinking, I'm coming here from speaking to you all from the mountains of North Carolina. And we have these wonderful jack tales that resonated through these mountains that were brought over here by the people from England. And, you know, Jack is this, he's Jack the Beanstalk Jack, but he's this character, but it's along the way, it's the people, the crazy, interesting people that he meets along the way that become his tribe, if you will. And Jack never accomplishes anything by himself. And I'm wondering, Chris, if you would speak more about that collaborative collective, because I think what's happened with this virus is we found ourselves in a collective experience, unlike any of us have experienced, I think, generationally. And so one question might be, what's the opportunity to amplify the hero's journey and in such a way that's collaborative, and what might be some illumination or understanding from your perspective about that, where we are now?
Yes, I understand this distinction, and it is sort of a culturally based difference that, you know, statistically, by and large, the Western side of culture tends to favor those solo heroes. And in other parts of the world, there is a much more common pattern of collective heroes. But the thought that came into mind was long ago when I was first chewing on these thoughts, it seemed to me that the characters in every story are sort of like what they say about dreams, that every character in the dream is some aspect of you. And so even in a story with a singular hero, the other characters represent the other possibilities for the hero, the dark possibilities, the male and female, and all the other polarities are expressed. And it's almost as if the original storytellers started with the seed of one person, Jack, but then started generating, okay, Jack has a friend, Jack has an enemy, Jack has a monster, Jack has a girlfriend, Jack has, you know, an ally and a sidekick, and all these other archetypal aspects. So to me, it's there in even these stories that are nominally one person tale. But David, you really wake me up to something, which is these are singular times, and that there may be a global story or a global song that is aborning here. And that would be terrific if we could craft some stories that were conscious of this and encourage this communal experience. That would be great. That would be a healthy takeaway. So thanks for that thought.
Just one thing I want to add to that before we move on is, you know, Joseph Campbell thought that picture of the planet, the first picture that was ever just of the planet with no boundaries, was like a pivotal moment in all of history, right? When we could see ourselves as global. And so I think that that's something to bring into this moment. And the other is, you know, one of his, Robert Walter, who runs the Joseph Campbell Foundation, which continues to publish the works of Joseph Campbell, some of which have been edited by members of this panel. Robert Walter suggests that one of the emerging things is the ensemble hero. You know, he talks about a little bit of a conversation he had with William Shatner, telling William Shatner he wasn't the hero, that it was actually the whole enterprise that was the hero. And I couldn't agree more. And I think that's what we're seeing more and more and more in our movies, as though our movies are preparing us for this, right? Especially things like Avengers, Fellowship of the Ring, you know, this kind of thing. So I just wanted to add a couple pieces from Campbell's background to resonate and reinforce what you guys are saying.
Yeah, I would just bounce off of that with the thought that it's a curious thing to me that there seems to be some predictive ability built into entertainment, and that you can, when you look back, you can detect the pre-echoes of big events like World War II, for example, or 9/11, or this. You can see it starting to emerge in metaphorical ways in films about 3 or 4 years before it happens. In World War II, some of it was conscious propaganda, like all the Errol Flynn movies at Warner Brothers were really propaganda films where Robin Hood was a resistance fighter against these European invaders of England. But before 9/11, I noticed tremendous amount of movies about big rocks hitting the earth, big things hitting the earth, big buildings toppling and so forth. And when I worked at 20th Century Fox, we had to stop production on 3 or 4 pictures because they featured buildings falling down. And it was thought, this is too traumatic. It's too soon. But in this case, I've been wondering why so many zombie things, which don't appeal to me at all. But somebody likes them, and it was meaningful to some people, but I think it was a kind of a rehearsal. And here I'm thinking that time is like an old vinyl record. And you know, when you put the needle down, sometimes before a big cymbal crash, you can hear it faintly because the big crash distorts the bands 2 or 3 bands away so that you can hear a little shh, shh, and then the big crash, and then after it, a little echo. So I think we might have been anticipating this in some ways in our art. And so I think the thing to do is to get in front of that a little bit and steer it towards healing and better stuff and more cooperative stuff like we're all talking about.
I wonder too, and this would be a question for some of the therapists or the deep depth people, but it's not lost on me that this is a big illness that is drawing us all together and sort of making a baseline of commonality. And I wonder archetypally, I'm just open it up to the whomever. I wonder what does that mean archetypally and psychologically, that it's the sickness that is making us more aware of our connectivity. I think it's fascinating. That's what's going on right now.
Well, I think I can try to respond to that as an archetypalist. I've noticed that there seems to be culturally, there seems to be a great resistance to going into the depths of what this illness is asking of us. And I'm thinking of the many times that James Hillman advocated for not trying to lift ourselves out of the illness, not trying to go through the worst parts of the hero's journey too quickly, but instead to be true to our depression, to stay in it, to stay with it. So that would be, what he would call pathologizing, recalling that one of the ways the soul speaks to us is through our pathologies. But the other thing that's been on my mind ever since this coronavirus really began is another of Hillman's moves, which he describes in Revisioning Psychology, and many of the people here know this, which is dehumanizing. And in dehumanizing, what he's basically trying to say is, okay, so yes, humanity is suffering. There's no question about that. But who is not suffering? Or can we expand our eye to include other life forms on the planet who are experiencing coronavirus quite differently? To give you a very simple example, I ride my bicycle all over LA, and I'm thrilled that the roads are empty and the air is clean. And I look at the trees and I know they're happy. So the dehumanizing move in Hillman is the one that says, let's not forget in our preoccupation with human suffering that there are other, we share the planet with other life forms. And the biosphere may actually be benefiting by this pandemic. The other thing in terms of what you were saying earlier, Chris, about films that that sort of are that prefigure what we're going through, I keep going back to two films that I think are extremely important right now. George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And I wonder what would happen if, in fact, Romero had envisioned Amazon delivering goods. Okay, that's one possibility. The second film, of course, is that fantastic scene at the end of The Matrix, where Agent Smith confronts Morpheus and said, I've decided what humanity is. Humanity's the virus. So I would be curious to hear your comments on those two film references.
Well, I would just say that I resonate to what you're saying about dehumanizing. The way I read it back is that, you know, it's in a way, it's the only lens we have to look at things, but we shouldn't limit ourselves to that. And we should realize that we are relatively small organisms on this planet. And I've heard this from a number of people who feel that from time to time, the planet detects our presence as if a scaly rash on its skin. And so it wiggles around, or it scratches, or does something to try and scrape off this irritant. You know, that's one perspective for the trying to take the planetary perspective. But I've felt that what you say about nature as one of the silver linings in all of this. And I remember after 9/11, there was a detectable improvement in the environment and in the quantity and sound of the birds, because they have detection microphones all over the place. And even just stopping air traffic for 4 or 5 days produced a measurable improvement. So I would advocate strongly, as we come out of this, let's remember this and institute a regular practice of stopping all plane flights, for one thing, for 2 days every once in a while. You know, if I were running the show, I would have it done at the solstices and the equinoxes. As they did in the ancient world, they stopped everything. They put out all the fires. They didn't have sex. They didn't talk. They shut all the stores. They went into quarantine for a few days, days that were outside of the calendar. They didn't even have names and numbers. There were special days where time stopped. And everybody would fast and meditate, and then march down to the temple, which had a theater attached to it, and watch some plays. And usually a couple of hard-hitting, very extreme dramatic things with lots of death and, you know, mayhem and all sorts of startling things. And then they'd finish it off with a little Curb Your Enthusiasm. There would be a comedy at the end to leave you laughing and send you home refreshed. So I think these that this is the proper function of films, is to put things into perspective, predict sometimes what's coming, and then give us something to go back and help digest. It's a digestif, you know. It helps us. It can help us to digest these indigestible things.
I'd like to offer a comment in response to a chat comment. I haven't clicked that button, and I noticed there's quite a number of comments there, and one of them is from Dr. Odette Springer, a graduate of the Myth program at Pacifica. Hello, Odette. And I'll briefly read your question and make a couple of associations to it. You ask if I think that the coronavirus and our present response to it is an indication that we're inching closer to the end of the Kali Yuga. Well, that's a reference to Hindu mythology and the four ages, and the Kali Yuga being the one that is least orderly, where things are really falling apart and tending towards chaos. I think symbolically, mythically, we are, provided we take seriously where Chris locates us in the 12 steps. We're pretty early on, being called to adventure or maybe refusing the adventure. So we have to keep in mind how many steps are ahead of us. But the Kali Yuga, if you think about what those ages symbolize, the cycle of those four phases, it's when Dharma is least operative. And what does Dharma mean? A very beautiful word. It means that which supports life. And when the conditions of life lack harmony and degrade to the extent that they have ecologically and otherwise, politically certainly, there comes a time when some kind of radical shift has to occur. And Kali as a goddess is a goddess of radical transformation. She steps in, when the disorder, the adharma, is too overwhelming, and is threatening life at all levels, for humans, but other species, the resources of the planet, and so on. So I think in a way we are, and it's interesting in this discussion so far, there's been reference to the contribution that scientists are making, stepping forward, and where that may go, Dara's observation on that, Chris's great observation really about the role that artists need to play and how the shamanic function that artists and therapists, bring to the table. What hasn't been mentioned is the contribution of politicians. And there are definitely some notable exceptions at the level of mayors and governors that deserve our respect, and we need them. But it doesn't seem that that's really where the hope, predominantly lies. It has more to do with those who support life, not so much for, obtaining power and staying in power, but for really stepping up and making a contribution to what supports all of us. So those are some reflections that, Odette, that your question, generates in me. And just more personally, I'm as a contemplative yoga practitioner, I'm rather heartened that the particular small group I'm associated with spends a great deal of time thinking symbolically about what it takes in your practice to not just achieve greater peace and equanimity and so forth, but how that can actually be a resource for bringing what comes after the Kali Yuga, an age that has greater compassion, greater light, greater luminosity, greater collaboration, greater commitment towards restoring harmony. So thanks for listening to those thoughts and for your question, Odette.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'm stunned by the part about the goddess being so involved in healing in that situation. And I think that a lot of people are really thinking a lot about, with the hero's journey, better and worse has become very conflated with the masculine. I think that's a limited perspective, but there's something interesting there. And there is something going on where we've seen the last couple of years, a real deconstruction and attack, on the masculine. And I think that that's symptomatic of something we're going through in our culture, which is maybe the limited dharma, lack of dharma or something like this. But I think that it's all very appropriate, these deconstructing of that masculine ego. And, I think many people right now are pointing to paradigms that are more associated with the feminine being those which are going to bring us out, and not to be reductive in what those are. But I'm very struck by what you say about the Kali Yuga and the goddess.
Well, if I can just add one more comment, as I was thinking about Odette's question, an image or an association that came to my mind was the Durga Myth, because this is one of the many, many times in Hindu mythology when things are falling apart, and all the male gods really couldn't deal with it. So they collaboratively got together and actually yielded up what their individual strength and skill was, and it manifests in a sort of supernova explosion of the great goddess taking shape with 18 arms with the weapons that came from all of the male gods. So the feminine principle, really, it was understood, was absolutely critical, you know, to resolving the crisis at hand. And Kali manifests in the course of the different battles that are occurring, you know, to triumph over the disharmony that was operative in that myth cycle. She's just she's a manifestation, you know, of this collective feminine energy that actually is derived from the contributions that the masculine have to offer. But it's really the feminine principle that, you know, saves the day. So I thought I'd add that in light of your comment.
Yes, that's true in some movies too. I'm thinking about an old one of the great westerns. Well, it's in many of them, but sometimes, you know, John Wayne is fighting with Montgomery Clift in Red River, I think it is, and you know, they can't resolve it, and it looks like they're going to kill each other, and then a woman comes in between them in the last scene of the movie, and throws a gun into somebody's stomach and stops the fight and says, you know, you two love each other. What are you fighting for? Why are you trying to kill each other? You know, make peace. And she resolves it. So it's sometimes reflected in films. But I was just thinking about the idea of catharsis and the fact that many times it's sort of baked into the hero's journey that it has to get worse before it gets better. And that the seams in societies have to be magnified. Or within a person in therapy, sometimes a form of therapy is to magnify the oppositions and the polarities that are locked to the point where there's an explosion and some kind of catharsis that comes out of that. So I think an event like this is a big gong that rings and sends a vibration through everything and magnifies to the point where we are going to come out of this having a catharsis and having maybe resolved some of these big conflicts in our society. I hope so.
Now, I'll just say that we have, I'm coming to you, Boris, exactly to do this. I'm seeing so many wonderful questions I really want to get to. So Boris, Lance, who we not, I think, are those the last two we haven't, and Selena. Would love to hear from you three before we start really turning to the questions, which are starting to flood in a wonderful fountain.
This question is for you, Chris, and thanks everyone. I've really learned a lot through this, and it's really been uplifting. What I want to do here is build upon Elizabeth's question around James Hillman. Hillman argued in The Violence of Innocence, an archetypal inquiry into the American psyche, that innocence is the primary theme or primary virus of the American psyche. It's an addiction, according to him, to not wanting to know life's darkness and not wanting to engage in life's darkness either. And what it made me think of is this quote from the Gospel of Thomas. If you bring forth what is within you, what you have within you will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is within you, it will destroy you. So my question for you, Chris, is how can we link this to the hero or heroine's journey and this relationship to the virus and the pandemic?
Aha. Yeah.
And I guess it's important because
yes.
like Dara kind of changed the discussion and made it inward, and it was a kind of interior. And so that's what I'm thinking about when I ask you that question.
Yeah. Hillman's thoughts are interesting because he's in a way kind of counterintuitive. You know, my my first thought about it would be innocence is this thing we must cherish, but he's an advanced thinker in pointing out that it can be a kind of a trap. So I would just say, that the virus, you can look at it as it's come along as a teacher. It's, a terribly fierce teacher, but it's come along as, in a funny way, and again, counterintuitive way, as a gift from the gods, and as an enormous telescope that allows us to take a look at ourselves. And if we're fearful of it, we're stuck and we're done. And I want to say something about fear and what the hero's journey says about that. It seems that there's a kind of prescriptive thing embedded in the stories, which is you're going to flinch like everybody did, this crouch I was talking about, and you'll be paralyzed. You'll just be stuck for a period of time. And the way out of that is to name it, to name the fear and acknowledge it. And in fact, embrace it counterintuitively and say, oh, I know what that is that's got my butt clenched. I know what that is that's got my hand shaking. I know that's my old friend, Mr. Fear. I know fear. I've experienced fear before, and fear is actually my ally because fear has protected me from dangerous things, and it alerts me when there's a problem. So let's shake hands, Mr. Fear. I accept you, and you don't scare me anymore because I named you, and I know your job, and thank you for doing your job. You did your job, you scared me. So now I can go to the next stage and not be paralyzed by it. So it's funny, you've exposed something interesting here, that there is this hinge in almost everything we talk about that flips it from potential destructive to creative. Destructive, creative, happy, sad, good for us, bad for us. And it's up to us to reach in and try to, just in our little way, emphasize the positive possibilities.
Thank you.
Lance or Selena, do you have any thoughts for us?
Yeah, I really loved your, Chris, I really loved the, you using the virus as a teacher, healer, and as the gift, as a clinician. I mean, every day I see all these people, and they look at this change as a monster, that kind of an image, and it's to change that is a slow and gentle process. I wish it would happen quickly, but it doesn't. But it is, I think for all of us, the fears of what is going to happen in some way. We're almost jumping off a cliff. I mean, we're at the edge of the world as we knew it, and we don't know what the new world is going to show us or give us. But the other piece that Dara had mentioned was the newborns. As I'm seeing the transition in my clients and the fears and the anxiety and the craziness and the conspiracy theories and all of that, I'm also seeing a newness, the little babies coming out of them. It's quite extraordinary. And I never thought of it that way until you mentioned that, Dara, so thank you. So both of you, thank you, because everything that you're doing and saying is validating some of the stuff that I'm experiencing as a clinician.
Yes, you mentioned the word monster, and I use the word dragon to describe this thing, and those are, easy thoughts to categorize as bad things. But again, I'm seeing this duality running through everything we're saying. Everything has a hinge in it. And of course, dragons are, in cliche, Western society thought of as horrible monsters. But in other parts of the world, they're signs of good luck, and they're to be cherished, and they represent all kinds of positive things. And monsters, as some of the great filmmakers have shown us, have, like Frankenstein, there's a dear little child inside Frankenstein. And although he's dangerously out of control, like, a teenager with hormones, he is a gentle being, at certain times. So all of these things with a little switch in your head can turn. And so it's great. I love the way you describe this, that you're working with your patients and maybe seeing a little seed of something and trying to nurture this new perception.
Will?
Yeah, I think we got Lance here just real quick before we shift.
Well, it's hard to offer any wisdom after all. What does anyone know? I like what Elizabeth said about the plants, the trees. And I wonder if if we think of this as anima mundi's expression, the soul of the world, maybe the world is better off without us. And ridding the planet of our pestilential species would be good for the planet. And a new life would come of it. And maybe it's better that it not be a human life. And maybe this is going in that direction in a really severely apocalyptic scenario. And so I do want to honor James. We need to, be in that darkness before we offer words of wisdom and hope.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So that's one thought, that this is the planet's way of coping with the disease, which is essentially us. What we're doing is just get rid of us. So on a more positive note, going back to, I don't remember who talked about, this is a collective journey. And, one of our friends, David Gustafsson, who wanted to write a dissertation on the hero journey as a collective thing that people do together. They go on a journey together. And he felt that not enough had been written about that. And I think that's a great idea. And the only example that I could think of was Watership Down, where all the rabbits get together and they go on this extraordinary journey. Richard Adams' book was such a beautiful thing. And maybe that's what's being called for, a collective journey where we're all in trying to move forward. And then one last thought is the haunting mandala image of the corona. And these images that we're seeing on the screen are circular, powerful mandalic images of a very deep self. It's almost as if the eye of the soul, the eye of the planet, the eye of God is looking at us from the inside and trying to get our attention. And it's a little scary, to think of that. Coronavirus lives inside of us. The film I thought of was the one in the spaceship where John Hurt is sitting down to have his spaghetti and he starts feeling sick. It's the one with Sigourney Weaver. Alien, that's what it's called. And all of a sudden, there it is. It comes out of him like that, the way it does. And that this is something coming from inside. And it is scary. And I just want to thank everybody who's contributed some thoughts about the situation, and thank Dana and Will for bringing us all together, because after all, this is our community, and it does get a little lonely in our separate little spaces. And one final thought back to what Chris began with, what can we do? And start with your desk and, work with our material. Keep working with the inspirational material that we're all, you know, so passionately interested in, which for us is, you know, myth and folk tales and literature and art, and just stay on that course. And, you know, so when things get better, if they do, they might not, we'll have something to offer.
Thank you, Lance. And as promised, would now like to, with the last 20, 25 minutes or whatever we have, would like to start answering and turn into the audience. And one of the things that you were just talking about set up one of these questions. So I'm gonna raise Kate McCallum's question to anybody who'd like to answer it. Movies where we actually get along with aliens instead of fight them, blow them up and destroy them. How do we join forces with aliens, with them, and work together to make a better universe? So if anybody wants to continue moving with that metaphor of the alien or aliens, would love to hear people's thoughts. Thank you.
Well, I can answer that one because I worked on a picture at Fox that tried to experiment with this, which was called Enemy Mine. And the idea of the film was that a very racist, actually, anti-alien space pilot crash landed on a planet with the only inhabitant being another crash landed alien who was his deadly enemy. And it was actually a remake of an earlier film that was set in World War II, where two guys ended up on I think it was Toshiro Mifune and Tony Curtis ended up on an island in the Pacific together. And they tried to kill each other at first, but in the end realized the only way through it was to work together. And the little surprise kicker in that movie, which bears upon some of the themes we've been talking about, is that the alien, who I think was played by Lou Gossett Jr., turned out to be a female, to the surprise of the human pilot, and he died. And the human pilot was left to raise the baby alien and became its mother. So the ideas we've been talking about of male and female were all played with in that film. It's a very nice film if you want to have something to look at that explores that other alternative possibility for dealing with aliens.
And I hope everybody that's participating is looking through these incredible comments, you know, where obviously we're not going to be able to get to every single one, but just some awesome thoughts, riffing on this, adding to it. So just wanted to point to those and thank everybody that's adding them. Did anybody else want to respond to the aliens thought before we go to another question?
Sure, I'd like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to hear what Chris thinks. I think a movie that really embodies a kind of embracing of the alien and actually changes the kind of paradigm of what passes for heroism or chivalrism is the movie Arrival, right? Because Dr. Banks in that movie, first of all, she's not a general, she's a linguist. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the movie, it is indeed the alien's language itself that saves the world and offers these possibilities. So there's this linking with the alien, there's this linking with the other that Martin Buber has always argued for. So I think that is becoming a model for what you've talked about in terms of the alien as ally versus the alien as enemy.
Yeah, that was a good one, wasn't it? It expressed all the fears that we have, and the aliens were made to look like something really awful that we would instinctively recoil from. But though she felt the fear, the female hero there was able to sort of tilt her picture a little bit and see what other people couldn't see, you know? And this is a lot of what we all have to be doing all the time. We have a frame that we were given, and it's not really fitting reality anymore. And so by just tilting the frame sometimes or flipping it, we can get that other perspective. And, you know, I have to do it all the time now, driving around and dealing with people who are driving too fast because there's not enough traffic. And I have to keep turning the switch that says, don't be mad at them. Realize you don't know what they're going through. So, you know, cut them some slack. And I think that was expressed in that film. You don't know what the aliens are going through, so give them a break.
Will, on our last moments together, we have an opportunity for us to use, all of us, the attendees, the panelists, being together. What I'd like to do is flip it over into the participants and figure out how it is that we can hear them say it rather than us reading it. So
yeah, you've got it. We're learning it, right? Do you have a mechanism for that?
Everybody, okay, I see. Okay, I see Felix. So I'm going to try to allow Felix to talk.
Okay.
I clicked the button. Okay, Felix, can you talk? Talking is permitted. Yes, he can say. He's got his hand raised.
But he's muted.
You have to unmute him.
I have to unmute it. Okay. I want to unmute it. Okay, I'm trying here now. Unmute.
Aha.
Did I unmute you?
I don't think so.
How do I do that?
Hello.
There he is.
Yeah.
We did it.
Yeah.
You're first. You're our guinea pig.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I love so much the talk and the presentation, especially the mixture of myth and shamanism. I've been working with shamanism in Japan, in Africa, and in Brazil, and it's so interesting to find out that the journey that the individual goes on goes back to himself so that he can find out himself and find resources to give and share with the community. So the talk we've had this evening is turning around that, going when time has come to stop, when the cycle has reached its end, we come back to ourselves and resurrect with enough resources to give to the other, to give to ourselves first, and then to give to the others in order to rebuild the world around us different from what it was before. So I would like to hear some reaction to what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Felix. Especially the idea that you have to, when you return, you have to nourish yourself first. You have to soothe yourself first so that you can then share the content of what you've learned in that other space. And I just would say a word about how do you know if you have this shamanic bone in your body? And one of the ways is that the shamans often are different from the beginning. They see the world differently, they talk differently, and it sets them apart and maybe makes them a little weird to everybody else. But then often there is some big traumatic event, often in childhood, where in the old days they'd be chewed up by a bear, or they'd be buried in a landslide, or have some terrible illness, and then go into fever dreams and visit that other world, and there be taken in by kindly spirit doctors and nurses, maybe not even in human form, maybe just globes of light. But the typical shamanic initiation dream is to be laid out on a table and have all your bones taken out. And maybe your body is cut up and dismembered, and all the parts and the bones are thrown into a pot and boiled, and as drastic as it seems, then taken and put back into your flesh. Maybe they take your brain out and recrystallize it and stick it back in your skull. And it's in order to tune you to these other worlds so that you can transmit the messages from the spirits more accurately. And I think everybody who is a creative person, everybody who's in these healing lines of work probably recognizes that, and probably has had some traumatic event that tore them apart and put them back together again in a special way with these special skills. So that's what I think of off your question, Felix.
All right.
Let me just add that I'd like to add that that is your medicine. You know, where you have been wounded,
Yeah.
and where you have healed, you know, that is your medicine. You have those antibodies now, and you can heal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I would like to also address the idea that, you know, the world is going to reorder itself. You know, after 9/11, I think most of us remember there was a few week period of time where it felt like an implosion of some kind, and it was as if the facades fell away, and there was a sense of unity that most of us felt. And then the world rebuilt itself again, and then we all picked our corners and started pushing against each other. And this call to go inside is going to have an effect of bringing up for us our woundedness and bringing up our interconnectedness through the wound and through our wounding and through our pain, through our shared sacrifice and all. But the world's going to reform again. And going back to my original comment about artists in particular, that our call at this time is to remember, to be able to serve the world with the memory of this, that there are things that are emerging that we can continue to hold. And I think that is so important. It's not a small thing. It's not a side thing. You know, all of us come into this world come with various gifts, and if through any form of art and communication and interrelatedness we hold one of those gifts, that's our service. You know, that's how we can hold the memory of this and hold all that is coming through this. Also, I just wanted to add quickly, there is this concept that a butterfly flaps his wings in somewhere in Africa, and then we get our hurricanes. So based on that concept, I looked up the symbolism of the bat. I was just curious that somebody ate a bat, and the world has collectively shifted in such a gigantic way. And symbolically, kind of throughout the world, the bat's actually a very positive symbol. It's a symbol of death and rebirth. And also in many cultures, especially in China, it's good fortune. And so there is something about these metaphors that are just, we are living in such a metaphorical time that Lance, I think it's much more optimistic that yes, it clearly, as you said, you know, we have been causing stress on the earth, and it's kind of interesting that the earth is sort of responding in kind. You know, we are choking our environment, and it's interesting that metaphorically it's coming back to us in a form of choking. Mm-hmm. And but you know, instead of looking at that as a note of hostility, I think we can look at it as a note of communication, as a note of relationship. And these are the kind of symbolic things that I think we as artists need to hold on to, that we are going to continue to feel our way into this. And I think what we gain and what we feel and what we come to, we have to hold and communicate with as a form of leadership.
That's definitely needed now. Some direction, some clear guidance about that, and positive. So let's hear another question.
One thing I want to drop into here, and then I wanted to go to my good friend Zaman Stanizai, who is out there. We're going to take one more question. But following up on what Dara said, there's two quotes I have about the wound. And the first one is from Rumi, which plays into Zaman. The wound is the place where the light enters you, which anybody who knows Leonard Cohen will know that there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So let's see, I should have Zaman on there. Do I have Zaman?
I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
All right, here. I see you.
I was thinking about, I was writing an article about a month or maybe 2 months ago about kind of the state of the world, and I realized that through my assessment, the world was in a pretty bad shape, that most powerful countries were headed by by presidents, prime ministers, whatever the leadership title was. They were headed by people who were among the greatest violators of the human rights, misogynistic, hate mongers, and so on and so forth, whether they used an ideology or a religion extremism. So it was pretty bad. And then I was just thinking, like, why I mean, like, when the world was bipolar, at least one or the other camps will come to some of these poor countries' rescues, but there was no such a thing at this point. Then at one point I was saying, like, I mean, what solution can be offered? Well, there came the solution, the virus. For people like in Yemen, or in Syria, or in many of these countries like the Uyghurs in Western China, there was no hope. And I saw somewhere someone wrote that, look, all these anti-terrorist activities have ended because everybody's busy, taking care of the virus. And so there are all these kind of very, very strange to describe. But I think at the end, what comes on top is that when you look at it now, the countries that are dealing better with the crisis are countries that are headed by women. So the feminist element comes in. And countries like Denmark, Finland, New Zealand, even Germany, compared to its neighboring countries, it's doing much better. They have less arrogance. They are more receptive. They are more, as the nurturing feminine. I think they are coming to the rescue of humanity in a sense. I just want to throw this in more as an observation than anything else. Thank you.
Well, that one resonates with me. I think that's true that, we are at the end times. We're at the end of playing out in a certain sense, the masculine dominance. And this may be the death blow to that, or the thing that gets us out of the Koyaanisqatsi state of being out of balance about it. And that's my hope, is that we come out of this more balanced in a lot of ways, and that's one of them. And it's so ridiculous that we have this debate in the States of, is it too soon for a woman to be president, and so forth. Ridiculous thing to even have to think about. But I hope this will help to get past that and bring in more of the feminine side of compassion and all these things we've been talking about.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to everybody. Before we close, and I hand it to Dana to ritually pull us together for a final moment, I'll just remind everybody that next week is going to be with John Colarusso, who's one of the world's leading linguists, founder of the largest linguistics department in the world. He's from Canada and has worked and various diplomatic roles for the Clinton administration. So he's got some incredible political perspectives as a mythologist, comes at it from a different point of view, but still from a myth and narrative anchor. So I hope you guys will stick with us for that. I think all you need to do is if you are signed up for this, it might be recurring. You can also go to mythosophia.net, which is spelled how it sounds, mythosophia.net. And you'll also find under the post for this event, I will add the video of this to it. So if you'd want to share it with anybody, if you think it's valuable to anybody, I hope you will. Very much hope that you will. And I hope we see you next week. And with that, thank you to everybody. And Dana, I hope you can pull us to a close.
Will, can I ask a really quick question before Dana closes? Will you be able to save the text and questions as part of the recording?
I'm going to stay on here for a little bit and use this as a kind of a training session to figure out what I have. And there are questions and answers. There are chats that are going on. There is clearly so much out there in terms of the audience reaction, the audience question, the audience participation. And I would put this back on the audience. What can we learn from how we did this? This was a first time out. A week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I'd never really even been on a Zoom session. And so this whole idea of getting up and having literally hundreds of people respond to this thing. I mean, they were just dropping out of the sky. And it's terribly gratifying. But to me, it points to the need, to the deep need that we all have and desire to participate in a discussion of psyche.
And before we move on from that, oh, I'm sorry, Dana.
Psyche is telling us something. Psyche is, the earth is talking to us. And with that, I want to go through my ritual. I want to read you a short little thing, which is from Leonard Cohen. This world is full of conflicts and full of things that cannot be reconciled. But there are moments when we can reconcile and embrace the entire mess. And that's what I mean by hallelujah. So I'm going to unwind my bowl. And if Chet Bland is still in the audience, I'm going to unwind it backwards because I do it this way going forward and I do it this way coming out. And I want to thank everyone who has supported and encouraged me. You just have no idea how deeply meaningful this entire process is. I'm turning off my candle. Or blow it out. And with that, wish you well. I hope you'll join us for another Myth Salon. If you have feedback and you want to email me, I welcome it. I'm just a student in all this. It's a process of discovery, and I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for my good friend and colleague, Will.